I must have done something right with my diploma film because Mani Kaul saw it and liked it very much and called me to ask me to edit his documentary, Mati Manas. That was 1984. And that's really where I learned editing because not just in terms of rhythm and pace, but also what an editor is all about. With money, it was like the first week was we were sort of finding our feet, our equation with each other, and I would sort of say what I felt about a sequence, a shot. This is working, this is not working. And Paddy was there. Paddy was the recordist on the film. And he said, listen, Reena, Mani's not used to being spoken to like this, you know. He's like Mani Kaul. So just tone your comments down a bit and it might be smoother. I just said, yeah, okay. So Mani'd say, what do you think? What do you think of this cut? What do you think of, should we put this shot after this? And so on. And I'd say, yeah, whatever you say. Yeah, I think this looks good. You know, that was being diplomatic. And Mani said, are you well? Are you okay? Have you settled in Bombay? And, are you meeting friends in the evening? And are you eating well? Can you cook? Blah, blah, blah. I think you need a holiday. Take a day off tomorrow. You don't seem yourself. And then in the evening, when we were walking home, I just told Paddy, I said, I think he knows what I'm all about, what I'm like. And I think I'm just going to be myself. And I'm not going to be extra respectful or anything. So lesson number one was, it was the director and the editor were collaborators. We were collaborating, we were creating something, and everything I said or felt was important to him. And it didn't matter that he was so much senior. He had chosen to work with me, and I was free to say what I felt, which was fantastic. It was like a real freeing of, that you're just some editor. Celluloid is running at 24 frames a second, 2 frames, divisions of that 24. So 2, 3, 4. What is the beat? What is the kind of beat you're looking for? Just a fraction, a little more, a little, all those things. In the institute, the way we'd cut was a character leaves frame, a character enters frame. You sort of make it a smooth cut, a match cut. But with him, it was like, there's a breeze that comes, the leaves are fluttering, the trees are bending, maybe a crow flies past, maybe a bullock cart enters, maybe the wheel, is making a certain kind of sound. Anyway, there were certain elements that I started looking at in the frame. So every film, of course, is not cut like that. Every film is not shot like that. Every filmmaker doesn't work in that way. Doesn't need that kind of expanse in which to unfold his project. The other thing that was important with him was flexibility. I'd lose sync all the time. These were 35 films. We had like 100 hours of footage, and I would often lose sync. And initially, he would say, okay, just, move 2 frames, whatever. After some time, he'd say, I'm not telling you what to do. You figure it out. So there was this sort of, a responsibility that is thrust on you. And finally, because I still couldn't cope, he just said, the sound is not important, actually, because we did try and shoot with a blimp camera, but it still made a lot of noise. And we would have had to dub the sound anyway. He said, the dialogues. Even though it was a documentary, he had fictionalized characters, and Kamal Swaroop had done the script, and there was dialogue and all that. He said, everything. And anyway, most of it is not lip sync. And he said, okay, just drop the sound. We'll just cut the picture. The reason why I'm saying all this is also because technicians we often work with, we try, I think when you lack confidence in yourself, you try and you give the other person a hard time. I think when you make a choice to work with somebody, you're looking for a certain level of communication. One evening, I remember I was talking to one of my ex-student friends, and he said, so how's it going with money? And I said, it's okay. It's just that I seem to lose sync all the time, and I'm not so happy. So you lose sync all the time? Oh gosh, how could you? Shame on you, etc., etc. But when I started assisting, after Mani's film, I assisted Renu Saluja on some features. And I would notice that she would lose sync. And I said, Renu, you lose sync? And she said, all the time. What's the problem? Just make sync marks. She showed me how to do it. She showed me how to organize material. She showed me how to number cuttings. She showed me the ropes, how to organize. And I'm very, very grateful to her for that because, again, I deal with masses and masses of material. And now, of course, it's all on my laptop, but I make bins and I make more bins and I have folders and I have generations and I date it and I make a copy, backups, all of that. And it's something that Renu instilled in me. You have to be able to find your material. There's no excuse for not finding a cutting. I'm really going to talk about how I work with directors because I don't edit my own films. I know I'm an editor that many people have wanted to work with and have worked with, but when it comes to my own films, I need another mind. You need a collaboration. When I start working with a director, the first thing I say is, sum up your film for me in one sentence or two max. But I need the core idea. I like to deviate from that. I like to go a little tangentially, but I want to come back to what the core is. I edit sequences. There is no, and that's the most challenging and exciting part of editing a documentary because there's no beginning, middle, end. There's no script. I often edit as the film is being shot. I start editing sequences, and slowly the film comes alive. I often read research material. There was a film on the Maruti strike in the Maruti factory where these workers were sent to jail, and I mean, they're still there. And I read a lot of stuff just to familiarize myself with what was happening. I'll just show you a clip. It's the same material. It's the same director. It's the same editor. But one film has been put together for BBC. The second version has been put together for Al Jazeera. So you will get an idea of what I'm talking about. What is the point of view? What is the aim of the film? That comes through quite clearly in this.
31, 32, 33, 34, 35.
In 2000, Lydia Kwashi was a Ghanaian Nurse of the Year. Lydia, like many of her classmates in this graduation photograph, is typical of those skilled health workers who have left their country to work in the UK, Europe, and the US.
41 out of 70. I think even there are more than that. About half of the class.
Life travels back home with Lydia to investigate what this brain drain means to a country like Ghana.
Midnight, March the 6th, 1957. Independence. Ghana belongs to herself. Schools, clinics,
That future wasn't always smooth. Since independence, Ghana's had a mixed history. 4 republics, 4 military regimes, plus several foiled coups. Economically, there was uneven progress. In the late 1990s, the bottom dropped out of 2 key exports, gold and cocoa. But in the last 5 years, Ghana's economy has started to improve.
Ghana is, by everybody's account, a relatively well-governed country in the world, yet it's impoverished and it's facing many of the aspects of poverty traps that engulfs its neighbors and most of Africa and many other parts of the world. And the drain of skilled labor, especially in the health sector, is one of those traps.
For over 40 years, there's been a trickle of Ghanaian nurses to the English-speaking developed world. One widely quoted source says almost 2,000 nurses left Ghana between 1995 and 2002. And the exodus is set to continue as nurses opt to leave a crumbling health system to earn more abroad. In the UK, some nurses can earn more in a day than they could in a month back home.
You get the idea. It's not just summing up what the film is about in one sentence, but whose point of view are you telling the story from?
Leaving behind my family and friends. I had no choice. I needed to support my family. 41 out of 70. I think even there are more than that. About half of the class, they are not here. They are all gone outside the country. Now, I work as a carer in a nursing home in Sheffield, but I'm a skilled midwife with 30 years experience. I trained at Kolebo, the best teaching hospital in Ghana. Many of my colleagues are here for the same reasons. They say that we feel guilty, very, very guilty, but there is nothing we can do. But the only thing to do is to go away. If you push somebody, so much to the wall, that person has to pass through the wall. It's not nice. You have children, you have family. You leave them, you look back, you are crying. They are also crying, but you have to leave them. Why? Because you can't do anything, yeah.
So it's the same material, it's the same subject, but told very differently. And the impact, the effect is very different. I heard of a Jain businesswoman who took Diksha. She renounced the world, she renounced the material world, and became a nun, a sadhvi. And I put in a proposal. I spoke to her mother and I said, do I have your permission to shoot with her, to film with her and tell the story? And she said, yeah, okay, come to Ahmedabad. When I met her guru, I was not given permission to shoot with her because the sect was a very strict one. And the mother forgot to take all that into account. And I was not allowed to film with them because my camera and my equipment uses batteries and consumes energy, and they don't believe in any of that. So it was a bit of a crisis because I'd got the funding for the film. I had imagined I would spend 6 months with the sadhvis and film with them over that time and put the film together. The first 6 months of her renunciation, but I wasn't even allowed to shoot. So I stayed with them, and through a street light that was coming in, I couldn't record her voice. I couldn't take pictures. I would handwrite notes about what she spoke. I'd also interviewed her family, but they weren't able to sort of propel the story. I needed her as a character, but I couldn't shoot with her. So Nirmal was again editing the film, and he kept saying that this film needs your journey and your struggle with telling her story as much. You have to have two parallel stories, hers and yours. And that's the only way this film's going to make sense. So I was very self-conscious. I was very nervous about putting myself out there, talking about myself. And I resisted it for a long time. But finally, that's the way we did the film. And I think it's come out quite nicely. It's really one of my favorite films. So that's what happens in a documentary. You have one plan, imagine it's going to be that way, it doesn't turn out that way. You have some material, you put it together, but you're constantly evaluating, constantly assessing, constantly playing with that material and seeing what else it needs.
I've seen her transition from a 100% businesswoman right till she took Diksha. And the transition has been phenomenal. Usually people have very little knowledge. They take Diksha and then they gain knowledge. In Jigna's case, it was completely opposite. She gained knowledge, she understood what Jainism was, and then she decided to go in for Diksha.
To gain knowledge, that became an obsession. I would spend hours reading about different philosophies and religions. I traveled to Pondicherry, Rishikesh and Varanasi. If anything else had appealed to me, I would have gone in that direction. Whatever is right is mine, not what is mine is right. I think it was Nietzsche who said, if there is a God, how can I endure not being one? I used to think of all the qualities a God must be having and aspire to having those myself. It is not as audacious as it sounds. In Jainism, we don't have a God like you do. A human being who has transcended the cycle of births and rebirths is Bhagwan. One who has conquered his inner enemies and in the process freed himself from karma.
When I'm with them, everything seems to be in perfect harmony. But at the same time, outside, a war is raging. In fact, one night, a mob attacks the building opposite theirs. The convulsions in the city must surely affect Jignya, I think, and her whole philosophy of non-violence must seem under attack. Doesn't she feel the urge to react, to protest, to intervene? But she inhabits a different interior world.
At present, I'm engaged in my own search. I'm working to change myself from within. I don't feel I have answers for others, or the wisdom or authority to change the external world. As I transform my mind and heart and become stronger, I will be able to serve others.
The Jain sects are headed by acharyas, men who are more high profile and powerful than the sadhvis. I'm sent to this higher court of appeal, where permission to shoot is once again denied. I'm told my equipment runs on batteries which are charged by electricity. The consumption of all these energy particles implies a destruction of Jeev, or living beings. I think, but do not say, how far do you carry this? Would you refuse the help of life-saving machines if you're dying? We do consider recording a few things secretly, but dishonesty is not a real option.
My narrative was not planned, but because the situation demanded another layer, this other layer, this struggle came in. There was another film I've made called Skin Deep, which was about 6 women, 6 urban middle class women, looking at body image and self-identity. So because there were going to be these 6 long portraits of these women talking about themselves and how they looked at themselves, whether they felt too fat, too tall, too thin, too dark, too whatever, I also wanted to cut it differently. I think partly because I'm an editor, it was important to somewhere arrive at a core of what that sequence was meant to convey, or that interview, that portrait, and cut it differently. So each interview, each portrait is edited quite differently from the other. There are only 6 of them.
That is, so that's why first I felt, how should I wear a sleeveless, like say a skirt or a frock, a midi, whatever, or a top. So it comes like, no, they'll be watching my muscles. So I just to be a bit conscious. So, but then I said, no, why not? I mean, rather it'll look toned up, gorgeous. I mean, looks wonderful.
So विनीत, तुम्हें कैसे लगता है सुनीला का बॉडी बिल्डर होना?
Now she's my sister. I like that she's being bodybuilder because she can protect herself. But if she is my girlfriend, then I won't accept her.
How do you want your girlfriend to be?
I want my girlfriend to be beautiful and simple as well.
What does simple mean and what does beautiful mean?
Simple, like she should do all the household work when she's in the house, and like she should be able to converse with each and every person which I know and which she knows.
And beautiful means?
She should be attractive. Like she's going on the road, they must say she is Vinny's girlfriend, right? Everybody must say, so that she has some image in the society.
So you think that the fact that she's a bodybuilder will affect her personality?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, she will be dominating after. Always she will be dominating.
ऑटोमेटिकली ऐसा हो जाता है, जानबूझ के तो कोई करता नहीं, लेकिन ऐसा हो जाता है. एक बार बहुत पैसा आ गया, बहुत शेयर मिल गया, बहुत कीर्ति मिल गई, कभी कभी.
This is one situation where when you're editing, you're not always staying with the situation the way it is. Okay, number one, you have to interpret it. When we actually shot the kitchen conversation, she spoke a lot also. She contradicted what her brother was saying, what her mother was saying. She spoke a lot. But I just felt it was becoming too long, and she's also, in that setting, suddenly she was not very confident. She was also stammering and stuttering. And she didn't come across that well. So I eliminated her talking, because anyway she's had her say. And I just kept her quiet, smiling, It's somewhat ambiguous. You can make out she doesn't agree with what they're saying, but she's just keeping quiet, and they get foregrounded and they speak a lot, which works quite well. I mean, everyone said, oh, she's so mature, she's keeping quiet. So people tend to interpret it like that. I've manipulated it. As an editor, you manipulate. You have to. So one of the things I do is when there's a rough cut is ready, I close my eyes and I hear the film. So I need to hear silence, I need to hear effects, I need to, or, they'll come later, but I need to sort of sense that there's this much of a pause. I need to hear a male voice, a female voice. I need to balance the narratives and I need to hear that. And I often find that at the end of the film, I've not used my favorite shot because there is no place for it. So my first film was Kamlabai, and there was this absolutely wonderful shot which was taken from her balcony of little children. So it's set in a colony which is under construction. There were new buildings coming up, new construction, and there's a heap of whatever sand, and there were children sliding down it. But every time I used that shot, I couldn't just have one kid just coming down once. She'd have to go, and the children would all laugh, and then they would go to the top, and then they would slide down again. But the minute you used it, even twice of having them slide down, you'd forgotten what was before and what was after, because that shot was just so wonderful in itself, you kind of forgot. So I'd put it in and then say, no. I'll find another place for it. But I just couldn't. Till the end of the film, I couldn't find a place for it. So that taught me my first bitter lesson about editing. You don't use shots that you love necessarily. They have to have place, they have to have meaning. If they don't fit in, they don't fit in. So I have one bin called TBU, which is to be used. And I always, at the end of the film, I always review that. Have I used all the shots I wanted to use? And some shots don't have meaning by then, but some shots do pop up. Have I used it? Can I use it? So you'll find some late evening shot or a night shot. It gives you a pause. It gives you a transition. So yeah, so do that before you wind up your films. The other thing I always do is show the rough cut to friends whose opinion I value and friends who are going to be very harsh and very honest and often brutal. But yeah, I don't know how many of you have seen Kamlabai. That was my first film. I keep referring to it. So this is, I met her because I was researching on silent cinema in India. She's India's first screen actress. And I just went to meet her. I was researching, wanted to write a book maybe. And she was utterly charming. We spent the day playing cards and she cheated and she had jokes to crack and I just fell in love with her and decided to make a film instead of, working on some book that would take forever. And she was 88 and she absolutely defied old age for me. She was really just not what you expect someone of that age to be. So I started filming with her and she was in the habit of cracking jokes and being very funny. This was 16 mm. I couldn't raise the money to make the film. And I would edit other films and I would put bits of money and then we'd go and shoot with her. So every roll, every minute, every foot was very precious. So when we were asking questions and we'd ask her about working with Dada Saheb Phalke or acting on stage and this and that, it was fine. But the minute she'd start acting in front of the camera and cracking jokes at our expense and fooling around with us, I would just cut the camera because I was so scared that we were wasting footage. Anyway, so then I put a rough cut together and I showed it to these friends. There were, 6 or 7 of them. And there was this silence after the film got over, the rough cut. And there was this real, nobody said anything. And then somebody said, where's the loo? And something. Acha, baar chalte hain, let's have a drink. And, you could just make out everyone was avoiding talking about the film. So then I said, okay, guys, let me have your opinion. And they said, it's just dead. It's dead, it's boring, it's just information. It's, you kept talking about how she's so wonderful and wacky and funny, and you don't see any of that. And that's when I realized this is also the time when interviews were just very like, ask a question, get an answer, that sort of thing. And I was not recognizing that the material, the real material or the meat of the film was really when I was switching off the camera. So anyway, we did another schedule and I got that. But really, if it hadn't been for this feedback that my friends gave me, I would have just made a very different film. But Kamlabai turned out to be an entirely different film and quite radical in the way that Indian documentary and interviews have been made after that. So I'm utterly, completely grateful to my friends. And that's a strategy I've always followed. Once the rough cut is done, you've got feedback, you've revised it, made any changes you want to make, I take a break. I take a break for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, go away, take a holiday, work on some other project, come back, and then look at it again. I never wrap up the film at that time. And it often leads me to very surprising revisions of the film. One instance I can think of is Sanjay Kak's In the Forest Hangs a Bridge. That was a commissioned film by the government in the Northeast, and it was about a bridge being built by a community and in Arunachal Pradesh. It's a bamboo bridge, and it's all about a community coming together to do that. And so the film went to the producers for approval. They approved it. They loved it. I went away. I came back. Sanjay messaged me saying, film's approved. Come back. Let's finish it, whatever. And then I watched it after that 2-3 week break. And I just said, Sanjay, it doesn't make sense. Why did we cut it like this? And I want to give it another go. Okay, how much time will you take? So I said, a week. Give me a week. And he just disappeared. I said, now you go away, and I'm going to work on it. And I redid the film, and he liked it. The producers liked it. We finished the film. It got 3 national awards for him, for the camera, for the editor. And I think, again, it's really because you give your mind a break. Also, you have to, as an editor, have the capacity or keep developing the capacity for assessing, for not being sentimental, for being critical of your own work, allowing others to criticize it as well, and being open to that. Just enjoy the process, really. It's a struggle. It gets easier. Not always too easy. You're always on the edge. Am I getting it right? Is it working out? But you'll get there. Yeah. So I faced a lot of you being anxious about where to start. I don't think there's the right place to start. If a particular sequence speaks to you, start with that, edit that. Then you'll be okay about starting another sequence, maybe another sequence. Then the connections, some shot, something, the material starts playing in your mind and you'll start joining it and it becomes a structure. I also like to use sound to replace words, sound effects to replace words, if it's possible. So if there's a worker in a factory talking about spending his days and the sound of the machine getting to him, and he can talk about it. Can you replace that with something like where he's in a bus, going home, having his meal, lying down in bed, and you have the sound of the machines going on? It would mean the same thing, right? So everywhere, see what you can replace. Spoken word, if you can replace that with something else, which would generate the same meaning, but give a relief. I also do a lot of audio editing. So the interviews are not interviews as you've recorded them, but I also remove the the and a lot of my directors say, oh, but that's natural. But the point is, if it's going to be a long film, it's going to be 1 hour, and everyone's going to do or repeat themselves. Just you can't deal with it. It's boring. So you have to be very careful what you retain, how much repetition, how much mumbling, hesitation. So much, no more. you know. Uh, so yeah, like I'm saying, be brutal, edit, edit, edit. We saw films where you just feel if they'd only done some more audio editing, it would be so much better, you know, tighter, and just the essence of what is being spoken. So we weren't taught that was uh, the font and titles. And when we were working on celluloid, you went to the lab and there was somebody else in the titles department and they would shoot your. So when I showed Kamlabai in NID, it was very interesting. And I had screenings all over the world and nobody had said anything to me and everyone loved the film. And in NID, one student got up and said, "Why are your opening titles so large?" And I was like, "They're large?" And of course they were large, you know. But I hadn't registered them and nobody had said it. But you guys are like, you're trained, right? You're trained in design, in font, in size, in all of that. And it's, I mean, your typography and everything is just so elegant. But so that is when I became very conscious of font, text, and how it can be used. So I'm just going to end with a tribute to NID and what I learned here, and show you some bits of text that I've. So this is again back to the factory film, where a lot of information had to be communicated, a lot. And it's a 2-hour film. And some of it was heavy, but I tried to use tussle between the corporate image of Maruti. This is a strike in the Maruti factory, and the workers, the conditions, I won't say too much, but I'll just play 3 separate sequences where I've used font and graphics, and I think you can congratulate me.
दिसंबर में तैयारी स्टार्ट कर दी थी 2010 में यूनियन बनाने की। जून में हमने अपनी फाइल लगाई रजिस्ट्रेशन के लिए। चंडीगढ़ फाइल गई, वहाँ से फैक्स आया मैनेजमेंट के पास कि इतने लड़कों ने साइन करके फाइल।
So this was shot 3 times. The first time when the director shot it, they had no electricity. They couldn't shoot indoors. The workers were sitting, a group of them was sitting outdoors. And he started drawing on a sheet of paper. And it didn't work because, again, the workers are not used to talking. They'd go, you know, just sort of very uncoordinated, unorchestrated sort of. It just didn't work. It was dull. You couldn't hear it. You needed a lot of that information to register, but you just couldn't hear it because it was so boring. Then we did another round of talking to them, which was indoors in their union office. I said there have to be some workers. You've had so many strikes. There must be some time when there are workers inside shooting on their mobile phones. Finally, we managed to get some footage. Of course, it was a cheap phone. The footage, the colors were bleeding. It was very bad. We made it black and white. I strobed it. I played with that footage. But we then used all the different interviews we'd done with the workers, and a lot of the information came in text on this footage from the phones. And then when we'd cut to them in sync, we could use the best bits where they were the most articulate. So even if a sequence has been shot, but you're not happy as an editor with it, try and convince your director to reshoot it, to try another strategy. keep looking for material that will help you in constructing the sequence. So in this case, finally, when we got the mobile phones, it was like a real boon.
So I think one question that I had while shooting some of the documentaries that I did as a part of my film school. So, how, how do you find that perfect sequence or that moment to sort of end the film, end a documentary?
Oh, that's
Because
tough. It's always
yeah.
tough. I'll give you an example. So in Kamlabai, she's crying and she's questioning everything. She's questioning her situation. She's questioning the injustice that God has done to her, blah, blah, blah. And everyone would say, oh, this is a perfect end. And I said, no, that's not her. It may seem like a closure of sorts or an end of sorts, but it's not her. She was a very spirited woman. And I said, it won't do justice to end on a dark note. So I really had to rack my brains and, sort of end with what finally is really, I think, the fitting end. But it is tricky. It's really to do with what do you want to say, what is the note you want to leave the film on. But the opening and the end are always tough. They're tricky. Everything else sort of falls into place.
Two questions. One, because you have been trained as an editor, but when you are directing, how do you control yourself to be an editor in a film? That it should not overpower the director in you. How do you do that?
I don't edit my films.
You
I
don't.
hate it.
So you don't interfere. You don't even.
No, I'm too close to the material. I'm also super exhausted. I just find an editor I want to work
Right.
with, and I just say, "This is for you."
And the
Like-
second question.
Yeah.
Does it help you in controlling your ratio of shoot? Because you know what you're going to use, what you're not going to use.
No.
You don't.
No, it doesn't. I may have a certain idea in my head that this is what I want this person to, this is what the person's about. And this is what the person should be saying, or this is what I want to use of that person. But if they're talking, I let them talk. It would be rude to switch off. I may not ask more questions, but if the person sort of whatever. So yeah, in my mind, I'm saying, okay, I can do this, and she said this, and that's cut. I mean, I'm assessing. Of course, I'm processing what I'm shooting.
You talked about the feedback. What I feel personally, when the feedback starts happening, somewhere you start losing that vision. So, where to set the boundaries? Okay, this feedback is fine, but now I'm going to take this and not going to take this. So, like as a beginner, I'm asking this question: where to set that boundary? That okay, this feedback is not gonna. I'm not going to use this feedback.
What I do, one thing I forgot to say is, I watch the rushes and I start editing sequences, and after the sequence is edited, I ask the director to, we watch it together, the sequence, only just the sequence, and then I ask the director to do a kind of assembly, let's say, how the film should start and move. So the director has to have his say or see the film the way it is in his head. By the time you've worked on it for 5, 6, 7 months, you also know what you're saying and why you're cutting it like this, and you're ready to accept criticism, but you don't abandon your way of approaching the material altogether. Very often directors are very, very tense about receiving responses to their rough cuts. Many of them don't want to. I generally try and persuade them, especially if the film's very ambitious. Like this factory film, we had, I think, 4, 5 screenings for people. Trade unionists, students, different audiences, different groups. Sometimes one set of people, like trade unionists, then sometimes mix them. We did a lot of changes, we did a lot of screenings, needed to see that it was working with everyone. So choose the people you're going to show it to and whose opinion you value.
What is your viewpoint on the ethics of documentary filmmaking? Like, what are the ethics? How do we understand them? Because we are, as students, sometimes get confused where to toe the line or when to not toe the line.
Times when you have a character breaking down, let's say, or crying, or when they're vulnerable, when they're at their most vulnerable, I think that's when you really worry. Also, you shouldn't have provoked something for them to react in that way, or you shouldn't have egged them to it, or the director shouldn't have egged them to it. But as an editor, also, when you come across material like that, of course, it's like wonderful, so and so's crying. It's the easiest way to get everyone drawn into somebody's story. Yeah, you need to see if that. Films that I direct, I've always shown them to the characters I've shot with, filmed with, so that I get their approval and they're okay before I wind up the film. So it's important. That would help if there's something that you're anxious about. Should I use it? Not use it? Should I hold the shot for this length of time? Should I hold her crying for this? Or if it's a fight between a husband and wife, how much? Um, yeah, there are questions, but I think you could show it to them. You could play back. And if that's not a possibility, then your director's there and you have a conversation and you talk about the circumstances in which it was filmed. You begin to understand over time what his or her relationship with the characters is. So you also realize whether you can use this or not. There are many indicators.
In documentary, especially, narration really plays a big role. And so, one, like how the information unfolds and how the whole structure of the story, unveils to the audience. Is it something that has a greater weightage than visual? Secondly, how it binds together, like how you just weave visuals with narration. Is it something which evolves with the structure, like while you're editing, or it goes back and forth, or it like just wanted to know, like
Yeah, so it does all of that. Yeah. Yes. I generally like to avoid a commentary. Yeah, I just unless it's absolutely essential. I don't know why. I just have this thing about. I think I watched too many films, division films, and there was this commentary and sort of. Having said that, if you think the film needs a commentary, then it works in tandem. Really, sometimes you find it's overstating. So if you have interviews that are saying something. You might like to use the interviews, but if you think the interviews are going to take too long to make that point, then you just do it quickly in the commentary. So yeah, you play it by ear, really. Yeah. But I would say, unless the commentary is somewhat philosophical or funny, has a character, it's very hard to listen to a commentary. Or use title cards, or use other ways. If it's just a bridge, you can use other ways too.
So my question is, in the documentary about the women's journey into the religion of Jainism, you said you came to a situation where you had to add your own experience into the documentary, and usually a documentary is sort of they try to make it objective as possible to show what's happening. So when you had to add your own voice, did you have a struggle between staying objective and subjective and
There's no film which is objective. There's no such thing as objectivity.
Okay.
All films are subjective. I don't believe in objectivity. It doesn't exist.
Okay.
So even what you choose to keep, even the fact that I get Sunila quiet, even though she had a lot to say, that bodybuilder at the dining table, you're making choices. And you're making choices because you want to create an effect. As a filmmaker, you are saying something. Even when placing the camera, there's nothing objective about it. So there's no documentary which is objective. Even news is not objective. It is my point of view, and I will say it. I wouldn't take the trouble if I couldn't say what I wanted to say.
What are the things that I should take care of while I'm directing the film that will really help during the edit?
Okay, some very basic things would be take cutaways, take establishing shots. I don't like using that terminology. I don't even like cutting like that. One thing I like doing is giving anyone I'm interviewing something to do. So when Sunila's mother is in the kitchen and she's making idlis for lunch, so I like people doing something rather than just sitting in a chair and giving me an interview. I like a situation. You kind of have them relax. You kind of get them used to the presence of a crew, that sort of thing. You ask questions which are nothing to do with what you're actually going to ask them. You just have a conversation and then you lead into what you want to ask them. You look the person in the eye and you make eye contact, but you nod. You don't produce sounds that are going to make it difficult for you to edit out or cut. So just nod, smile, and even though your mind is saying, okay, she said this and I can cut and I can edit from this to this, your mind is somewhere else, but keep looking at the character and keep nodding and keep, keep them engaged, sort of like I'm listening to every word and you're wonderful, you have to give them that impression. I think these are the things, some simple things really, but